Welcome everyone this morning to the Tri-District Rotary Initiative to End Human Trafficking. I'm Stacy Schaffer with 31A Project, and I'm also with District 5580. And along with District 5580, we have, with the Tri-District Initiative, Districts 5950 and 5960. So we really hope this morning that you're able to learn some really valuable information about human trafficking, also hear from other clubs of projects that are going on that they have taken to their clubs. And if you're not in Rotary and you're looking at ways to get involved, hopefully you can learn some ways, additional ways just from hearing from me and other speakers too. So we are just excited to have everyone attending this morning and look forward to giving you information, but also answering any questions that you have. So thank you and welcome again.
Thank you, Stacy. So my name is Amia. I am part of District 5960. Claire and I co-lead that district for the Human Trafficking Initiative of Rotary. I will be emceeing this event. So Ed just shared the agenda if you haven't already seen it. So I'm just going to walk everyone through that. After I speak, Claire Lillis is going to speak on the background of our initiative. We started in 2017 and we've done a lot in those few years. Then Stacy will take it back away for the keynote, and then we will hear from some of the Rotarian clubs of what their projects have been. I apologize, I see an error now. Some of the clubs haven't been named, but they can introduce their clubs. And then at 10:30, we're gonna start breaking out into sessions, and we would ask that someone from that breakout session be a representative and a note taker. Some of us will be in the breakout session, so we can be that note taker as well. And then the questions that we want to go through are these 4 questions here. If we can do that during the breakout session and start having some ideas from that, that would be great. And then we're going to come back together and do a quick overview. We want to hear from anyone if they feel inspired or if they have some ideas that came out of that breakout session. And then we're going to close hopefully right at 11. It may be a little bit later than that, so I apologize. If you do have to leave and you want to get more information about it, get the recording of the link, please send me a message in the chat box and I can get that information to you. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to give this to Claire. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia. We want to give you a short background on the what has been happening since 2017. As Amia had mentioned, that was when we started. That really came out of the impetus from the Rotary International Convention in Atlanta, where we heard 2 different sessions, one being a plenary with all 45,000 people, and the other one being small group breakout. So after that, we came back and people from both 5950 and 5960 gathered and talked about forming a group to do some work. And so we gathered that team together. One of the first things that we did as we proceeded was to create a PowerPoint and train speakers to present at the clubs. We felt that our first approach needed to be to raise awareness within the clubs around the 2 districts. So a PowerPoint was created. So in 2018, then we began presenting to the clubs, and we decided also one of the ways to get projects started was to gather club champions in each club. And we do have a lot of club champions because of that. They would then, the idea would be that they would begin to work in their respective communities, since we know that almost every community has problems with human trafficking, even though it's hidden. So then in 2018, also a club champion training was done, along with a couple other groups. Education and law enforcement people attended that also. We had about 75 people in attendance at that one, down in Edina at the library there. then in 2019, at the very beginning, we started creating a website. That website is rotaryndht.org. And also that year, District 5580 joined our effort. Thus, it gave us influence throughout Minnesota, entire Minnesota, North Dakota, Western Wisconsin, and into Ontario. And just recently in 2020, we presented a webinar with Kimberly Mall. I know many of you saw that. She's a sex trafficking survivor who told her story and wove that story in among her ideas of what needs to be done. She's a vast background in that. She credits Rotary with saving her life. She was at some kind of a meeting at which a Rotarian was speaking about human trafficking. And by the end of that session, she realized she was one of the victims. And so Rotary helped her get education. She currently speaks around the country, especially working with universities and colleges and training the youth in those areas, as well as doing many other things. She's currently writing a book and working on her PhD. And now we're doing this webinar, which we hope will lead to many more projects happening in our clubs. This whole initiative is not a short-term project. It will be ongoing, just like the effort to eradicate polio. And as I said earlier, this issue is happening in most of our communities in various forms. It's just not visible because it is such a dark issue. We hope it will spur you on and help you in your work. And we really appreciate your being here. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Claire. So without further ado, I want to introduce Stacy, our keynote. I know I'm very excited to hear this presentation, and I hope it will lead to some great conversation in the breakout room and some great conversation this weekend as you walk away from this training.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so again, thank you for this opportunity to speak with all of you. I know that there's several people on the call that have done some work regarding human trafficking, and it's just exciting to connect with people from various parts of the United States. So this is very exciting. What I do want to share with everybody as we get started, some of the information I'm going to share, it can be a little bit challenging to hear. And I don't do that to scare anyone. I just really want to give you a picture of what human trafficking looks like so that you can take the proper steps in helping us to end this terrible crime. So please know that up front, that again, it's not with the intention to scare anybody, but I just want to help give you the best information that I possibly can. So also realize that this is a surface level. Human trafficking is a really, really broad topic, and you could talk about it for days. And for time's sake, we're not going to do that, obviously, but I'm going to try to give you as much information as I can in the time that we have together. But I do welcome any questions, so please feel free to ask me any questions, whether that's during the presentation or at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, here we go. I started my work in combating human trafficking in 2006. Part of the reason I got into combating human trafficking goes back to a little girl named Anna, who was trafficked at the age of 8. During that time, I was actually doing some work in Guatemala, and Anna was trafficked from El Salvador to a brothel in Guatemala. And while at the brothel, Anna was repeatedly sexually assaulted over and over again. Now, regardless of your age or who you are, this is going to be a very traumatic situation, and it was for Anna. Fortunately, the organization I was working with, we were able to intervene, and Anna was brought back to our shelter. During that time, we were able to put her through rehabilitation, and today she lives a relatively normal life. She has a family, she has children, and she's doing quite well. A lot of people see Anna's story as a story of tragedy, but for me, it was always a story of success because she survived to share her story. And we know working in this field, we don't always have the best outcomes, and this was a great outcome. And it was because of her inspiration and motivation that I started 31-8 Project, which comes from Proverbs 31:8, speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. So outside of the nonprofit I run, I also run the demand reduction program here in North Dakota that deals with purchasers who solicit prostitution with individuals over the age of 18. And then I also oversee our labor trafficking coordination in the state as well. So if you have any questions on those topics as well, I'd be happy to answer them. So today we're really going to look at what is human trafficking, how do we define it, Rotary's initiative to end human trafficking, and also ways that you individually, your club or organization can get involved. So human trafficking, what is it? Well, the definition part of it is the exploitation or sale of a person into commercial sexual servitude or forced labor. That can be really, really hard to understand what we mean by that. But essentially, human trafficking is modern day slavery. So we can break this down a little bit more into two different categories, labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Now, in the cases I have worked, I have seen people trafficked specifically for cases where I've had someone forced to work in a restaurant during the day and sold for sex acts at night. So that can happen. It doesn't always happen, but we can see those types of situations as well. Now, how large is human trafficking? It's really hard to get an adequate number on this, but we do estimate that there's over 40 million people enslaved in the world today, which is more than at the transatlantic, during the height of the transatlantic slave trade. So I don't know when you hear that number what you think, but to me that's a lot of people. And why this number is hard to track. In the United States, what we might consider to be trafficking might not be considered trafficking in another country. So we also have to keep that in mind why it's so hard to really track human trafficking. Now, when we're working on a case of human trafficking, this was a graph that was put together by the Polaris Project, which also runs the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So how do we tell if this is a case of human trafficking? Well, first we look at the act. Has the trafficker committed one or more of the following? So have they recruited someone, transported someone? By what means? Through violence, fraud, abduction, and for what purpose? Now, when we are working in sex trafficking, when we are working with youth, we do not have to prove the means. So the middle section, we do not have to prove the means. Human trafficking, it involves force, fraud, and coercion. For adults, you have to prove all three of those elements. For youth, in sex trafficking, you do not need to. However, in labor trafficking, whether they're adults or youth, you do have to prove all three elements. So you can see where this can get really tricky, especially when we're trying to prosecute a case. Do we have all three of those elements present? So that's where my job can get very, very interesting at times. So sex trafficking specifically, we do estimate that more people are trafficked into the sex industry versus labor trafficking. However, we're slowly getting more information that labor trafficking is a lot larger than we had thought. So for sex trafficking, we do see more women and girls being trafficked than males. But again, we do believe that yes, there are males that are being trafficked, but they don't always maybe come forward as women and children might. We estimate that 300,000 new sex trafficked victims are recruited each year in the United States. So for labor trafficking, in the work I do, I often hear those people are just illegal immigrants that are coming over to the United States. Well, I can tell you in North Dakota, every single case of labor trafficking I've worked on, they have came to North Dakota on a valid visa. So again, there's a misconception on that too. So I just wanted to quick share that the common visas that we see, and I see I'm missing a J there, but are H-2A, which is agricultural work. H-2B is non-agricultural. So that can be anything from hospitality, construction. If you have a local fair, carnival, people can be brought in on visas there. And then J1 is a visa that we also see is very common. This might be somebody that's brought in a student exchange program. They might be asked to be a nanny while they go to school. A wide, diverse range of work. Keep in mind there's over 100 different visa statuses, but these are just 3 of the common ones that we work with. So I just wanted to share that because I know it's a misconception that we hear quite a lot. So examples of the industries where we see human trafficking occurring. I can say in sex trafficking, the #1 way people are sold and the #1 way people are recruited is online. So that's why we do spend a lot of time working within the school systems to educate as young as we can get. A lot of times people will let us come in at 5th grade on up, but we do have programs. Obviously, the terms that we use are different depending the age, but we do have programs for kids that are even in kindergarten or 1st grade, just to start this conversation of exploitation. Other places we see this is massage parlors. We actually just had a case where we had many massage parlors, and I will reference North Dakota quite a bit because I am from North Dakota, but we had it, the owner of the massage parlors had massage parlors located throughout North Dakota. So we had to work several months on that particular case before we were able to go in and rescue some of the girls that were being trafficked. Pornography. 80% of the survivors we work with say that an individual will bring in a photo or a video of a sex act that they would like done. And so with that being said, we do see a correlation of pornography usage leading to someone purchasing another individual, especially in our demand reduction program. We do a pre-test and a post-test, and a lot of our individuals will say that I have an addiction to pornography. I was looking for that next high. Being able to purchase someone in person is what got me there. We also know that the way pornography is created now can rewire your brain the same way that somebody who is on meth rewires their brain. So it is very, very toxic. It's hard to even think that you would put those two on the same level. Labor trafficking. I grew up on a farm, so I am very sensitive to our agricultural community, but I also am aware that human trafficking does happen in that community. Construction, domestic servitude, hospitality industry, nail salons, cleaning services, just to name a couple. And then I just have organ trafficking starred there. That's a whole nother category of human trafficking. And basically how that looks is we often see people who, kidney is the most common trafficked organ, but you'll have a trafficker who hires a broker to go into an underdeveloped country and will offer somebody, anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 for their kidney. In return, that gets transplanted into someone else. But again, other organs can be trafficked too. So if you're ever curious about that particular topic, I'd be happy to share more information with you on that. How big of an industry is human trafficking? We estimate that it brings in $150 billion per year. So this isn't a small industry by any means, it's rather large. It's also the second largest black market crime behind illegal drug trafficking. The other thing to note is why is human trafficking continuously growing versus other things, right? Like drug trafficking. Well, the thing with human trafficking is you can reuse a person over and over again. When you are drug trafficking, you have to continuously give product. So a lot of times, some of the interviews from traffickers is just simply that supply and demand piece. It's you can reuse a person so many times and you can't do that with a drug. So unfortunately, that's another one of those reasons why we see this continuously growing. Now, I don't know about some of your communities, but I know here we get pushback because human trafficking doesn't exist. Well, obviously we know that's not true. In fact, rural America is one of the best places for human trafficking to occur. And here is just a quote from someone from Homeland Security. Traffickers like to work underground. They don't necessarily want to work in big cities. They are drawn to small towns because they feel like they won't get caught. So areas that have a lot of agricultural farming, areas that have not a lot of law enforcement on patrol, those are areas that are also breeding grounds. Traffickers know that, and they want to do some of their work there. So our small communities are sometimes the perfect destination for human trafficking to occur. So I know in North Dakota, some of our first cases we identified were in communities of less than 1,500 people. So it's not always our large cities. Of course, large cities, we do see trafficking, but it's also in our rural communities as well. So why the Midwest? Why is this such a popular region for trafficking? Well, we have something called the Minnesota Pipeline, and this is where you have a series of different states that are connected, where traffickers will utilize those different states to move their victims from location to location. We have seen even from Minnesota to North Dakota, where someone will start out in St. Paul, Minneapolis, they'll be moved down to St. Cloud, over to Fargo, Bismarck, and it continues on. So not always are traffickers moving victims from location to location, but here are just some examples of how that would look. It's also more profitable for traffickers in the Midwest, and what I mean by that, in areas like Atlanta, for example, you might have, when Backpages was still up, it's no longer up, that was a site that was commonly used for people to solicit other people for sex acts. Well, if you were in Atlanta, you might find 30, 40, 50 pages of different individuals listed, right? In our area, you might only find a couple of pages. So traffickers will charge more for a sex act in the Midwest versus a different community where there might be a lot more people being sold. So that's a big difference. That's what we often hear, especially in North Dakota, is I can make more money by trafficking people in this area. Because there's a demand, it's just that there might not be as great of supply. So who are the victims? I always say anyone can become a victim of human trafficking, but are there certain risk factors that can make someone more vulnerable to becoming a victim of human trafficking? Absolutely. And some of those things include poverty, runaway and homeless youth. That is something that we see quite a bit, especially for our youth victims. Lack of education, chemical dependency, and that's just to name a few. So there can be many other risk factors associated with this. When I'm working with our younger students, I often ask them too, from an online perspective, if I'm posting, my life sucks, my parents are terrible, I have no friends, if I'm a trafficker, you're definitely going to be a target for me. Also, if I am posting inappropriate photos, again, that puts us in a vulnerable situation. So we just need to be aware of who we're talking to, what we're posting, especially being social media plays such a big role in people's lives these days. From a sex trafficking perspective, the average person that is recruited is between 11 to 14. In terms of how many times someone might be forced or sold for sex in a day, can range 5 to 40 times. I have worked with people who have had to turn as many as 100 tricks. That's a term that we use for turning a trick. That's one person purchasing you for a sex act. On average, we've heard the number 10 quite a bit. 10 tricks a day, but again, it has varied. We estimate that once somebody is trafficked, the life expectancy of a victim is around 7 years. And how we come up with that, several factors. Not only are you being forced to sleep, have or do different sex acts almost every day of the week, but often we do see drug addictions playing a part of this as well. You're not eating the best, you're not in a healthy living environment, sexually transmitted diseases. All of those factors can play a role in this, specifically for sex trafficking. Now, labor trafficking, again, it can look a little bit different, but we've spent so much time on sex trafficking that we have better data in regards to that. So we're still working on that labor trafficking side. 3 out of 4 victims are trafficked online. This is a quote from Thorn. If you were at that Rotary convention in Atlanta a couple years ago, Thorn is ran by Ashton Kutcher. He is one of the founders of that organization. and he spoke at that conference. But here's a quote from one of the survivors they worked with. "I was advertised in the same way as a car or a phone, but with even less value than a bike." And again, that's always another stat that always sticks out to me. On average, what we see someone sold into slavery today is sold for around $90. When you go back to the transatlantic slave trade, the average person was sold, when adjusted with inflation, around $40,000 to $80,000. Not to say slavery was okay then, because it absolutely wasn't. It's not okay now. But there's several different factors of why people purchased people at a higher rate than they do now. So my point being is people are often seen as disposable. And when we're in a group setting, I know it's hard over Zoom, but I always like to ask people, like, what do you value your life at? And most people would say, I can't put a price on that. And I think that's fair. I think that's a fair assessment to make. So it's really hard to think that someone would value life at, less than $90. I often get a lot of questions specifically to Native American women. And yes, we do see human trafficking occurring on the reservations as well. We have task forces that are working specifically with different reservations, just to get some idea of how can we adequately combat human trafficking. So here are just a few quotes that came from a report out of Minnesota. So I just wanted to share this with you all. Native women are particularly vulnerable to sexual exploitation because of homelessness, poverty, medical problems, a lack of basic services, and resulting emotional distress and mental disorders. So I think it's just really important that we look at that as well. Here are a few other quotes that came from that report. If you are interested in that report, I'd be happy to send that to you. But again, that was a report that came out of Minnesota. How do we identify traffickers? This is where it gets a little bit tricky too. 50% of people are trafficked by people they know. So I've had cases where familial trafficking is common. A father started trafficking his 14-year-old daughter. He first was selling her to his friends, and then saw how much money he could make and started selling her online. So it's not always this random stranger, right? It can actually be within a family unit that trafficking occurs. And I apologize if there might be some questions in the chat that I might be missing.
Stacy, I'm addressing them, so.
Okay, thank you.
Concise them at the end.
Perfect. So male or female can be traffickers. We actually went through a period where in a certain location in North Dakota, we saw an increase of female traffickers versus male. So that can differ. I have seen traffickers who are doctors, people from the faith community, law enforcement. So it's not just one particular, it's not just gang members. I get that a lot. I get the picture of it's somebody driving a white van that picks people up off the street. That's not what we're seeing when it comes to these traffickers. So please keep that in mind, that it can be male or female. Unfortunately, we've even had some situations where we've had kids in the high school find victims that way as well, often though they have been recruited themselves, and then they are brought into school as a 9th, 10th, 11th grader and forced to find people to traffic there. When I lived in Minnesota, we had a case in St. Paul where there was a trafficker who had recruited a 14-year-old, 14 or 15, and he was posing as her dad. Obviously was not her dad, he was a trafficker, and sent her to school to try to recruit other people. And she was able to recruit another girl. What had happened, she befriended her, and this girl's parents met this dad and felt like everything checked out okay. Allowed her to stay overnight at this individual's house. It was a Friday night when she stayed overnight. That next morning, they just had this gut feeling that something was wrong. They went over to the house, and the house was abandoned and their daughter was gone. Not every case is like that, but I just want you to know that's how quick some of these situations can happen. So besides people being recruited online, there's also other venues that people can be recruited as well. Shelters, groups, homes, malls, teen parties, all different areas where people can be recruited. Another example I want to just give, that a case I worked on that involves social media. We had an 8th grader here in our community. She was befriended on Instagram by this older individual. He was in his later 20s, and they started dating. A few weeks into dating, she got this message on her Instagram from this modeling agency out in California that said, I really like the photos that you're sharing. I think you really have some good potential. And if you can get to California, we'll have a job for you. So she told her boyfriend and said, like, do you think this is real? What do you think? And he said, yeah, this is great. I'd be willing to drive you. So one day after school, he picked her up. They left town. Her parents reported her missing. Outside of North Dakota, Highway Patrol picked them up, brought her back. It turned out that this boyfriend was actually a trafficker. He had multiple different accounts on Instagram that he was using to recruit young girls. So always saying to people, just because someone says they're a business, have you actually checked them out? Have you called them? Are they a real business, or is this somebody that's posing as someone else? Like, we really need to do our homework, and I can't stress that enough to young people. There's many apps that traffickers will utilize, but here are a few where we've actually seen trafficking situations occur. I have a full list of over 50 websites and apps that we have experienced trafficking situations. If you are interested in that list, again, I invite you to reach out to me. It's things that we don't just necessarily share with everybody because, again, unfortunately, we hope people wouldn't take it and use it in a harmful way. So typically, if people are asking for the full list, I know they're doing something probably good with it. So if you do want that full list, definitely let me know. Now, how do we identify human trafficking? Now, this is the tricky part. Someone might show one red flag, they might show multiple red flags. You also have to take in, you also have to reference culturally as well, how some of these red flags might not always make sense. For instance, traffickers will often try to groom their victims to not make eye contact. Well, in some cultures, it's seen as a sign of disrespect to make eye contact. So it's some of these red flags we just have to make sure that we understand that it might not always be a trafficking situation. But some things that we've seen when we're talking with someone, do they have coached, rehearsed responses to questions? They typically have bruises that are in different stages of healing. They often won't have their ID or other identification documents. I have a case right now where the individual, the person that is potentially trafficking her, is withholding all of her documentation. So that's always like a clear sign that something else is going on there. They might be moved from city to city very frequently. We've seen this within our school systems where, like, we had a case where a mom had a new boyfriend, and this was during the height of our oil boom, and he would take her 2 daughters who were in middle school on the weekends over to like Williston and Watford City. He was selling them for sex acts, and then when they were in school during the week, they would act out, and they had a lot of issues. But it took several months to figure out that it wasn't that they were bad kids. They literally had something very emotionally taxing happening to them every single weekend. So just noticing some of those signs. You might have a friend, or maybe it's a child who starts dating somebody much older and is very controlling, doesn't let them hang out with their friends, only allows them to hang out with them. Again, those can all be signs to us that something is happening. It might not always be human trafficking, but there's probably something there. So we have to use our gut on that. Now, there's a lot of different terms associated with human trafficking. I'm not going to go through them all, but human trafficking wouldn't work if you didn't have facilitators. Facilitators are the people who, they're drivers. They might be the tattoo artist that makes a brand on somebody. They might be a hotel. So multiple people get a cut in this industry. That's how these industries work, and that's why they continue to thrive. John is another word for what we call a buyer. We try not to use the word John very much anymore because a lot of people are named John. So the intent behind that, though, was John Smith, Jane Doe, when that term came into play. So we often use buyer now instead of the word John. Pimp is another word for trafficker as well, when we talk about sex trafficking specific. Daddy, uncle, those can be terms that we hear for a trafficker. Circuit, that's when individuals are moved from location to location. And then, of course, I want to highlight branding. So when we think about branding, it's a way, again, to create ownership over someone. And usually these are in the forms of tattoos. So I'm just going to show you a few different examples of brandings that we have seen. So barcodes was a big thing in like around 2010, 2011. That's something we don't really see as much anymore. Brandings can range from multiple different symbols. The girl that you see that has the branding on her back, her trafficker's name was Cowboy. His nickname was Cowboy. He branded her 7 to 9 different times, and it was all Western decor. So it was cowboy boots, cowboy hats. But every single girl that he recruited, what you see on her back, that was his creed. That was his rules. So you can tell he was definitely, it's almost something that you'd read in a Bible, is what it reminds me of. This case ended up going federally. He was trafficking people from various different states. But again, it just shows those different examples of what traffickers will use to try to create ownership. The good news that we've had come out of this is we've had several tattoo artists that have stepped up and tried to alter some of these brandings for our survivors, so they get to choose what it looks like. It's very difficult and expensive to try to remove tattoos. So if we actually can, format it to something they like or appreciate, we're going to try to do it. So in the corner, you'll notice that's one example of how there was a branding and then they were able to alter that tattoo. So just an example. Now, obviously, I've referenced supply and demand. Human trafficking would not exist if there wasn't demand. Earlier, I highlighted a little bit of pornography usage. Here's just a couple of other stats I want to throw at you for that. We're a culture that tolerates or promotes sexual exploitation. The average age of first exposure to pornography for boys is 8 to 11. One of the individuals I work with, he often jokes because he's been in the social worker now for almost 30 years. And he's like, when I was young, to try to find pornography at all, we had to go usually to the garbage dump and be willing to dig through the garbage to get it because it just wasn't as accessible as it is today. A few other quotes that always stand out to me is porn sites receive more regular traffic than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined each month. Those are pretty heavily trafficked websites and platforms. So that's pretty phenomenal there. Porn is a global, estimated $97 billion industry with about $12 billion coming from the US. So again, we talk about that demand piece. When we do sting operations for demand stings, for purchasing of people, for prostitution, we, within an hour, and this is North Dakota, in one of our cities, we'll easily arrest 70 to 80 people. So, I mean, the demand is there. And if we want to really try to combat this, we have to combat the demand. The average age for buyers, it does vary. I've had people in my class ranging from the ages of 20 to in their 60s. So it does vary there. Most purchase sex for the first time before age of 21. Sometimes sex is purchased from both indoor and outdoor locations. Some of our buyers, yes, they're married, some are not. Some might have a fetish of some sort and they don't want to ask their partner to engage in that. So they feel like I'll purchase someone instead. For a lot of these buyers though, there is a notion that it's a transaction. They don't realize what is occurring around this. Like they literally think they're entering into a transaction. So part of our job is just getting the information out that no, when you enter this transaction, there's a lot more happening than just switching money. That oftentimes you'll even have the trafficker in the room and not even be aware of it. So we really want them to understand that. Also, why is it difficult then for victims to get help? So I get asked this all the time. Why don't they leave? Why don't they just walk away? Well, it's not that simple. Trauma bonding, you could just spend hours on trauma bonding by itself, is a really big reason why it's not simple for victims to leave, or survivors. Oftentimes they have fear and distrust. Their trafficker may have instilled that into them and told them not to trust law enforcement, not to trust your family, and that can make it difficult. I have a survivor that opened up to somebody about what was going on, and they said she deserved it. And she started to think she did, and it took her another 6 years before she would talk to someone about what was going on. So I often tell people, if somebody confides something really heavy or personal, that your job is to listen, to not have judgment, and to just listen what they say and try to get them that help that they need, because they're opening up to you for a reason. Some of our survivors, they have children with their traffickers, so they're worried about what will happen to their child. Their family might have been threatened, so the trafficker might threaten to hurt their family if they leave. If you guys are familiar with Teresa Flores, in her book, The Slave Across the Street, the trafficker there did subtle things like killing the family pet, leaving notes in the mailbox, just to create some type of control over that person. So it's not easy for that person to just leave. Even though I know we'd like to think that, it's just not that simple. So what did you do if you suspect human trafficking? So for example, let's say you're at the grocery store or you're at the mall, and you notice that there's two individuals. Maybe the one individual is a lot older, and the girl or guy with him seems very anxious. They're looking down. They seem nervous. They might be showing signs of distress. That can be an indicator that something's going on. So what we ask you to do is not intervene, because if this is a trafficker, you have to remember they don't care about you. They don't care about the person they're trafficking. Our law enforcement tell us, out of all the criminals that they work with, these traffickers are the worst type of criminal that they have to deal with, because they simply don't care about human life. So we don't want you to engage in that, because not only could it harm you, but it could also harm that potential victim. Instead, we want you to write down everything you see. Do they have a birthmark? Do they have some type of tattoo? What type of clothing are they wearing? What car do they go into? What's the license plate on that car? Write down all that information. And then we ask you, if it's an emergency, to call 911. Otherwise, call local law enforcement. And if you don't want to call local law enforcement, most states, and I know I'm missing some states for individuals that are on this call, but North Dakota, we have a tip line. Minnesota has a hotline as well, and Canada also has a hotline. So you can report a tip that way, or if none of those options feel good to you, you can also use the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So you can call or you can text a potential case of human trafficking as well. So we just ask that if something doesn't feel right, take the step to make the call. You're probably right. There probably is something going on. It might not be trafficking, but there's probably something there. So just take that step. Before I go into just the final section here, something I share in every presentation, when I was in Minnesota, we sat down with a group of survivors and we asked them, what are some things that you want people to know? Because it can often be difficult for some of our survivors to share their story, which I completely understand that, but we want to make sure that their words are being heard. And here were just a few things that they shared with us. Think about things from our point of view. Never say you understand because you haven't been there, but still try to put yourself in our shoes. Language counts. The words you use make a difference. Calling us prostitutes hurts us. We may act hard, but we have to have the wall up for survival. Deep down, we know we need help. We need more information about your services, and we need it to be in places where we can see it. So I just always share that because it's so important to me that the survivors' voices are heard. So finally, what do we do to end this? It's, I know after hearing that information, you can just feel like, wow, okay, there is a lot going on. But the good news is we are in a position where we can help. And some of those ways we can help are through raising awareness, educating children and youth, reducing vulnerabilities and risk factors, and stopping the demand. So why Rotary? Why should Rotary take up one of these initiatives, right? You might be asking yourself that. Well, the beautiful thing about Rotary is that they are literally located throughout the world. So that allows us to have a greater reach when it comes to combating anything such as human trafficking. So within Rotary, why we really feel it's important to have a club champion is if each Rotary club could go back to their community and either raise awareness and just share information on human trafficking, just think how great our impact could be throughout the world. And that's really what we're trying to do in our tri-district. So what our mission is as a tri-district is provide Rotary clubs with information, resources, and toolkits to engage their communities and support local organizations working to end human trafficking. So again, these are the 3 districts right now that are part of this initiative. Now, ways that you can raise awareness: you can sponsor speakers, host an event, candlelight vigil. If you attended Atlanta's event, again, they had that candlelight vigil, which was so beautifully done. Another great way to raise awareness. Host a documentary. If you're part of a book club, suggest that your next book be on human trafficking. There are so many great books. Rebecca Bender, who also spoke at that conference, just released a book this summer. I would highly, recommend sharing those books with others. Using the power of social media, sharing articles. But my advice is there's been a lot of misinformation out there on human trafficking over the past couple of months. So to make sure you're posting the right information, contact your local organizations and ask them, is this article legit? Is this something that is good to post? They're going to help steer you in the right direction. Talking about this issue with friends, family, and colleagues, trust me, it's not always a fun topic to bring up, as my family knows, but it's something we have to hear. We also have a Rotary Club to End Human Trafficking. That's a virtual club. And then there's a Rotary Action Group Against Slavery. So some really great things that are happening in Rotary. Other tangible things you can do as an individual. So there's something called the Soap Project that Teresa Flores created. And I'd be happy to mail you some of these soaps. We had 1,000, I think we're down to 800. So pre-COVID, we were planning to distribute these in rest areas and hotels, and they just have not all gotten out because of the wonderful pandemic. But anyways, what's nice about these is it's a soap that you can leave in those rest areas or hotels, and it has information, including the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Traffic Cam is an app that you can download on your phone. What's nice about this app is if you travel quite a bit, you can take a picture of your hotel room and it uploads it into this database that's used by law enforcement to try to help find people that might be trafficked and are on an ad. Because oftentimes when traffickers are taking pictures or posting ads, it's often of the survivor being in a hotel room. And so they can identify, they can match your photo with other photos and figure out which hotel room was this photo taken in. Something else that we're doing in our district is Bravery Backpacks, another tangible project to do. What happened for this project is we had local law enforcement tell us, hey, we work with a lot of vulnerable kids, or we have situations where sometimes in the middle of the night, we have to go in and we end up arresting parents, and now we have these little kids that are literally sitting for hours at the station waiting for placement. So what can we give them while they wait? And this is just basically a backpack of a few essential things, but also a stuffed animal, PJs, the book When You Are Brave, just simple things that they can feel appreciated, especially during that difficult time. So for this particular project, we gear it towards ages 2 to 12, but you could change that age range as well. Also, educating children, parents, and teachers. There are several different curriculums out there that are great that can be used in schools, but you can also even use them at home or within other organizations. So here's just a couple of those different options. And then, of course, stopping the demand. A lot of times what we hear from buyers is, I just felt like I had no one to talk to. I had nowhere to go for support. Well, what's nice now is we do have certain programs out there where it's just catered to men specifically, and it gives them a safe space where they can have some of these difficult conversations of, dealing with potential addiction to pornography, unhealthy relationships. I will say, I also teach at the University of Mary here in North Dakota, and we are now actually having an increasing problem of females also struggling with pornography as well. So this is no longer just what we would maybe deem a male problem, but it's also a female problem. So we're trying to figure out some programming for them as well. So just a few different options. Claire mentioned our website earlier today. There's toolkits on there of all the different things I mentioned, and ways that you can get involved within your communities. And I just want to leave you with a quote before I take any questions. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. So I don't want you to feel deflated or just feel like, oh, what are we going to do moving forward? Because just by being here today and getting this information, you are already doing something. So I really want you to know that and take that away, and also know that just by sharing this information, you're already doing something, and that truly does matter. So with that, here is contact information for the 3 different districts, as well as some information about 31A Project if you would like to check us out in the work that we do. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Stacy. Okay, so there's a few questions coming in. The first one I want to address is David Leggy, and I'm sorry if I pronounced your last name wrong. David asked if about the victims that have had fetal alcohol syndrome, I believe was his question, and if that is something you're aware of.
Yeah. So I'm aware of it, but I can't, if I'm speaking, I don't work as much with our survivors as our case managers do. So I'm always on our response teams, but I don't do the case management piece. So I feel like our navigators or our case managers could speak a little bit more clearly to that, if that helps. So I know that's not a great answer, but I'm definitely aware of that. But I don't necessarily always work as closely with our victims as our case managers do.
Thank you, Stacy. And then a question from Jim Hodgson. Did Claire answer your question that you had regarding, your question was, what governmental licensures and regulations are required for a community to raise money to open and operate a sexually exploited youth facility? Did you get your question answered?
Actually, I know the answer.
Okay.
And I know it from the professionals in Bemidji that I serve with, because I've asked this question. So it's going to vary by state. Stacy, be different in Bismarck. Yep. In Minnesota, to operate a victim recovery facility, you need to be licensed by the State Department of Corrections or the State Health Department. And those are your options.
Thanks, Jim, for sharing that.
And Jim, you bring up a good point. Housing is a very difficult situation across America in regards to survivors of human trafficking. So I know in North Dakota, we don't have a specific shelter just for victims of human trafficking. We have beds that are designated within our shelters for victims of human trafficking. But again, that's difficult because if you're working with adults or youth and where they're placed. So in terms of housing, that's a big factor. And also, I only know of maybe 2 or 3 shelters that are specifically for males only. So there's also that as we're seeing more males coming forward with being victims of human trafficking, essentially, where can they be housed as well? Because you wouldn't house the males and females together. So keep that in mind, that those are other areas of need.
And then there's a question from Claire Lillis. Claire, do you just want to ask the question? Because I'm trying to find it on the chat.
It was already answered in the presentation. I would, Jim, I would go back and say our experience with the Umbrella House is that there's no state regulation, but there are local that may affect it, and they aren't specific to trafficking victims or shelters. They're more along the lines of what is the facility like, what things do you have in there. You may need to get conditional use permits in the area. You may have to have public hearings, which tends to be a real problem, because then people around the area will know that it's there. And in this case, we primarily want that not to be disclosed. We're going through that right now. We didn't think about some aspects of that with our Ambarella house, and we're having to backtrack and work with our county attorney on how we can get our name removed from the public documents. So we're struggling with that right now. But there aren't very many regulations. It depends on how many people you're going to have, what you're going to do, like in the kitchens. You have to have certain kinds of equipment, maybe. A lot of that is coming from the health department, or you have to have fire regulations. You may have to have, you need a fire inspection just to make sure you have the proper equipment.
Thank you, Claire. And then there was a question from Jennifer Miller. I'm curious if/how Rotary works with law enforcement agencies. Traffickers can be very dangerous and not valuing human life, and wouldn't think twice about harming a well-meaning person who could expose them or their business. Jennifer, I want to address that first by, I know there is a club on here that is going to be speaking about it. I believe they did partner with law enforcement, but Stacy, feel free to address that question too.
Mm-hmm. No, that's actually absolutely a good question. So I know even in the End Human Trafficking Club, the virtual one, we're actually having conversations too of how, like, anytime you're presenting this information, knowing who's coming into the conversation and trying to be well intentioned on that, because in today's world, you got to be really cautious. Like, I know when we do presentations and we're working with survivors, I'm very cautious about who's attending. Do we know those individuals? Do we have any concerns? So that can be difficult. But I know that's like a side note. I just wanted to share that is something we are looking at too as Rotary clubs. How do we do this safely? But within a lot of our Rotary clubs, we actually have law enforcement officers, which is nice because it's helped us streamline some of that communication with each other. Like, for instance, that Bravery Backpacks program, that was by working with a Rotary club and law enforcement in one community. So I feel like because in each Rotary club you have such a diverse group of people, you do have that communication, or have a way to bridge that communication between your service providers, law enforcement, and just anybody else who has that vested interest. So I don't know if I'm really answering that well, but we are partnering with them, and trying to make the proper steps to make sure everyone's safe in the work that they do too.
Right. Yep. And I know, there's no simple answer, obviously, but it's something that's very complicated, and there's way more, Rotarians, and other people, boots on the ground all over, whereas, law enforcement can only be so many places at one time. And obviously we're not going to go out and arrest people, but at the same time, how can we help without endangering ourselves? Because these people obviously have very extensive networks as well. So
if I could
yes,
I think a key thing when we've talked about with our tri-district task force, the biggest role for us as Rotarians is to raise awareness, to make sure that the information is available for victims, that it's distributed, that it's well connected with people who can actually intervene and do help. But for Rotarians, the key part, being members of the community, is to help raise awareness that this really is an issue. It's a severe issue and something that we want to be able to help address.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to both of your points as well. So the best way we can help is by just spreading that awareness and that education piece, but also asking law enforcement what their needs are. So that's like, again, that Bravery Backpacks was just like, this is a need we have. Can you help us there? Because that'll help us alleviate some of the stress that we currently have. So that can be one way. Also, I saw a comment come up about being trauma informed. Absolutely. So even in my organization, we have various levels of how people can volunteer. So you can volunteer and just help out at events, that's fine. But if you are ever coming in contact with a survivor or working with a survivor, we put you through a specific trauma-trained training so that you are equipped and you know how to have a proper conversation even with a potential survivor of human trafficking. And then we'll also do background checks as well. So being very intentional about if you are having volunteers, and what our volunteers might do sometimes is like help a survivor get groceries, take her to a job interview, take her to an appointment. But they have gone through extensive training before they'll even get to that point. So we just have to be really cautious. So really great points that people are bringing up.
Jim, did you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, if I can just give an example of what's working in Bemidji, Minnesota. So regional center, northern Minnesota, for those of you out of the area. We've had a county task force already operational for about 5 years. Law enforcement, social workers, head of the juvenile center. I'm the ministry world rep and the Rotarian. And what Rotary has done is help this small task force get the word out farther. So when we have a presentation, we've got the detective at the presentation wearing her gun, talking about leading the sting operation, and it sends an impact to our Rotarians that this is real. So keep that in mind. I'm not looking for more Rotarians to do undercover stuff. I'm trying to help these very worn out professionals get some encouragement from the greater community leadership. And because they do have a high turnover in their field, maybe a year and a half, some of these people on the front lines before they have to make a move emotionally.
That's a really good point, Jim, too. If you do have a task force, North Dakota just has one task force specific, but some states have multiple task force depending how large they are. So making sure that you connect with your task force is a really, really great way to get involved.
Jim made a great segue for us because the next topic we're going to be discussing is specific Rotary Club projects. So I'm going to start in alphabetical order with Blaine Ham Lake. Joan, are you ready? I'll unmute you.
This is Lynn, actually, from the Blaine
perfect.
family.
Sorry.
And our other district champion, Sonia Kloiber, is also on the call as well, and she's actually calling in from sunny Florida. So I'm automatically just jealous of that. A couple of things that we did after initially going to the training is we wanted to start with raising awareness within our own club. So we invited a local speaker who's written several books on trafficking named Bukola Oriola. She just come into our club. She talked about both labor and sex trafficking because she herself was labor trafficked. And this was just really just calibrate our club, just give people an idea of where this is occurring, the prevalence, that type of thing. And then we decided we needed to do this in our community, and it was building awareness in our community. So we hosted an event the summer before last, and we weren't really sure how many people would come, but we had a speaker from the Blaine Police Department, Noelle Volin, who's part of the Peacemakers Don't Buy It project, and another lady named Heidi from the Alexander House, where the victims of domestic violence can go there, along with people who have been rescued from trafficking. And we had probably about 80 to 90 people come to this awareness event. I thought it was well attended. And then next we were just like, what can we do now? And one of the things we wanted to do was get into the schools, have our detective offered to go in for some pilot study schools and just start talking to kids at a variety of different ages. And some of that, and I also attended a program last February in Chaska. Some Rotarians were there. It wasn't totally a Rotarian project, but there were many people from different organizations. And the one I remember the most was a guy named John Turnipseed. And he had the dubious distinction of being probably the first pimp in Minneapolis and really recruiting victims for sex trafficking. He has since, after spending time in prison and that type of thing, turned things around. But his message was really about educating kids and preventing kids from having some of those vulnerabilities and being, prey for the sex traffickers. So, and Kimberly Mull in her presentation, she was actually calling in from Nevada, and apparently there is legislation in Nevada and California that you have to have some curriculum in schools at 3 different points, elementary, middle school, and high school, for kids so they can learn more about this and help them from becoming victims. So about that time, you kind of get excited about some of those things. Then we had COVID-19 hit. So I had some questions for the group as to what some of you have done as far as trying to educate kids in the community and really kind of going from that prevention piece as well. So I'll just leave it there. And Sonia, if there's anything you'd like to add, please do so.
So my name is Erica, and I'm the local director of Hope Center, which is our domestic violence and sexual assault response here in Rice County. And we are also located right on 35. So when she was talking about that, I said, yep, absolutely. And so what we did recently is to partner with the Northfield Rotary. So I'm a part of Faribault Rotary. We partnered with Northfield Rotary and the ELCA, one of the WELCA groups of a larger Lutheran church in our area. And so between the Welcome members, both Rotary members, we had over 200 people attend our event, which was incredible. And we had the local police chief, myself, the local director of our youth serving program who deals with outreach to homeless and housing insecure youth. And then we had also our local just kind of human needs provider do a presentation, and then we also had a regional navigator come in and do the initial part of the presentation specifically on human trafficking, and then the 4 of us did the panel as to what that actually looks like specifically in our communities. And so I would highly recommend, you know, partnering with your local agency like Alexander House. You had mentioned that, and I actually know some of the people you're talking about. And so there's so many people already doing some incredible work, and so giving a platform to elevate that is so helpful, and we're very thankful for that. And especially if you can utilize and leverage some of your social capital in terms of being able to help us get into the school systems, because so many, well, particularly now, so many of the teachers in the school systems are so overwhelmed with all that they have to do and all the requirements they have, and how to make this as easy as possible. So it's just kind of a package that we can say, here, we'll make your job easier. And if we can get in there and do the work that we really are excited about doing and educating the youth. So I think it's just a matter of being able to utilize all the leverage and all the connections within Rotary, and that has been so incredibly helpful for us, at least.
Would you think it makes
Erica.
any sense at all to try to approach our state legislators to see if potentially they could bring forth legislation that mandated this type of training? Particularly now, as you said, schools are very overwhelmed with just taking care of distance learning and that type of thing. Has anybody tried anything from that approach?
Yeah, so there's a lot of legislation around sexual, comprehensive sexual health education. And so I would highly recommend kind of partnering with some of those folks. And MNCASA, the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, is kind of a leader around the legislation, particularly around sexual health education and prevention and things like that. So reaching out to them, I have some connections there and can certainly do that as well. So I would recommend, again, partnering with those people who already have all the legislative context. They already have a sense of legislators that are helpful and would be willing to co-author a project. And also this could also just be tagged onto the comprehensive sexual health education legislation. And again, part of that is just genuinely because that's a mouthful, and so it doesn't have a 30-second snippet. So the more people that we can help become educated about these issues, the more likely it is then that you can say, oh, well, this piece of legislation is incredibly important, here's why. And then those things do go through, the more that we can educate people, get people to understand what it really means when we're looking at pieces of legislation that are more comprehensive. So there are—
Erica, thank you so much for that. I apologize, we have to keep going, but can you send me your email address and send me a brief summary of all of that you talked about, because we have discussed that already, but I would love to send that out to everyone in this training after the fact. I think that's really valuable information. Lynn, your other member was cut off. Can she speak still about your club?
Oh, of course.
Sure. The only thing I added, and I just put it in the group chat, was that Noelle Ballin from Menace Peacemakers, that's an organization that's trafficking side of things, so I encourage people to reach out to them. They've really got some great programs going as well. So, you know, it's great all this work happening on the other side, but to get to the root cause of it, here's an organization that's doing great work on that.
Thank you, Sonia, for mentioning that. We actually did partner with her. She's been so busy that she wasn't able to be a part of this training. She was a part of the last training, actually. She was one of our keynote speakers. So we've been working with her for a long time. So I appreciate you highlighting her group. The next group, can we bring in Roseville Club, Julie, and have you speak about your club?
Thank you. Yeah, in August of 2018, the Roseville Police Foundation put together a task force to help the city police combat human trafficking in Roseville. And our Roseville Rotary Club was one of the first organizations to step up to the plate and become involved with that task force. Roseville Police Chief Rick Mathwig said that Roseville is a first-ring suburb, and most of the 11 hotels have issues with trafficking. And I work with the Roseville Visitors Association. Our big selling point is we're perfectly positioned between St. Paul and Minneapolis and right off the highway. So that is attractive to human traffickers. And most of the trafficking takes place in hotels with mostly adult females. There are some massage parlors in Roseville, but not much evidence of human trafficking there. Our chief initially requested $10,000 to help fund 4 sting operations, and our club contributed $2,500 to that effort. The 4 details in 2018 that they took place in 2018 and 2019, they helped create a new and improved template on how to monitor the advertisements, how to communicate with the various involved parties, and how to support the victims with off-ramping. And we developed a 3-prong approach, which was education, enforcement, rescue, and recovery. That was our initial goal. Today, the police department has a stronger and more streamlined partnership with nonprofit advocacy organizations like The Source, Stories Foundation, and SOS. And this allows the department to insert the appropriate services on an ad hoc basis instead of solely during planned details. Lynn Megan and I, and Lynn's on the call, we met with the Roseville hotels to go over the state sex trafficking prevention bill, which was introduced by Senator Jim Abler from Anoka. And we did it's a mandatory hotel training program. So Lynn and I met with all of the hotel the general managers and the director of sales, and we ran through the entire program with them. And it's all front of house, back of house, what to look for when you're looking at victims that might be in your hotels. So we ran through the program with them, and then they were able to show it to housekeeping when appropriate, show it to the front desk, when they had the time involved. So at least we got in there on the ground floor. We also helped create and promote a Freedom Flights fundraiser, which we hosted at Bent Distillery in Roseville in April of 2019. And our featured speaker was John Choi, along with Peter Wohler, the executive director from The Source. And we helped turn the spotlight on commercial sexual exploitation. And we invited community members in, along with our club members and then members of the Roseville Police Foundation. And that was really well received and really passed out a lot of great information. And the community has appreciated knowing what's being done with some consistency in our city. We also brought the chief and Peter in to speak at one of our club meetings, and that tape session, I believe, is still up online. And it's been a great partnership with the police, the foundation, our club, Visit Roseville, The Source, and Grace Church. And our movements right now, we're kind of on hold with the whole COVID deal. But I just spoke with Corey Yunke, who's a community policing officer with Roseville yesterday, and he said their latest is a chapstick that they give out to victims that has a QR code on that they can scan with their phone that has information on where they can get help. And he said the Johns don't know about it, but they tell the victims, and if nothing else, the victims have a chapstick. But otherwise, when they are ready to seek help, there is a code, a barcode that they can check out and hopefully call and receive help. So it was a great effort, and it's one, we got to kind of ramp it up again. And I don't know if Lynn has anything to add to it. And this is the human trafficking results from from the details that have taken place, and just kind of the key items to highlight are the fact that 164 unique potential victims were involved. 16 victims received on-site interviews and resources from the source. The source has really developed into a great partnership with the Roseville Police. And then of the 2-year thing, 6 males were arrested, 3 arrested for controlled substances. And then just the fundraisers, community presentations, things that we've done. So we are taking a good stab at it.
Julie, this is Lynn. Just a couple of other things we've done is when there has been a sting operation in our area, we've sent that out to members and other people that are interested as well, just to kind of keep it in everyone's thoughts.
Yep, good thinking.
Thank you, Julie. Do you mind unsharing?
I will stop sharing.
Perfect, thank you. I would love to share that in the follow-up email too, because I think I've seen that document before, but I think it'd be helpful for everyone to be able to take the time to see it. It's pretty incredible what Roseville has done. And I live in Roseville, so I'm a little biased to it. Joan, do you mind speaking about Prior Lake now? I apologize about.
No trouble. Hi, I'm Joan from Prior Lake Rotary Club, and always good information. Thank you, Stacy. Hard to hear, but that's okay. So I remember starting in August of 27 at Meg Lowe's house. There were about 3 gatherings of people talking about this. Kyle Haugen from our club was the district governor. And we had just had, I think, about 18 of our members down in Atlanta for the conference, which was very cool. And so then the whole thing started in the district, the 2 districts at that time. And I attended just for awareness. I went to a Lakeville Chamber of Commerce, which had police speaking about this topic. And Claire came out to our club a couple times and showed the PowerPoint, still raising more awareness. And then went to that champion training, and I think there was also an Out of the Shadows training. And then in April, our club put together a human trafficking, what everyone needs to know. And that was at the end of May. We had at the time we had the county attorney in our club and the chief of police from Prior Lake, and so they both spoke on the topic, and we had about 115 people attending, and we invited the public, so that was a good awareness. And then the head of our community service, Mary Haugen, she and I went to the district and presented a grant to help a project in Prior Lake, an area that works with human trafficking. And we got a district grant for $12,000 to go in and get therapy tools and a music room so that they could create and listen to music, which is really helpful if people can do something creative when they've been in such a horrible situation. And we helped build up their library and some educational spaces. And we were going to build a patio, but because of bringing people in, it's difficult, and it was hard. So we took that part out of the grant and gave money back to the district on that piece. And I think that, and then we helped with donating to that Rotary website for this. And we sent someone to Duluth for the training by Nicole Voel, a man from our club. And then COVID kind of got in the way. So that's about what things we've done.
Thank you, Joan. I believe there was one other Rotary Club we wanted to highlight, and I apologize, it's not on my list. If you are here and we spoke to you ahead of time, could you please unmute yourself and give a little overview? If not, I can speak on my club. Anyone? Okay. So the club that Ed and I are part of, the St. Paul Sunrise Club, we did something simple. We partnered with an organization called Brittany's Place that is a shelter. It's pretty small, but it is local to the St. Paul area. And what we did is we went up to them and asked them, what can we help you with as an organization in our community? And they said they would really like to have some trainings on self-defense classes. So what we did this year was we funded and paid for all of the girls that are living there to get self-defense classes. It's something simple. Because of COVID, we can't be a part of helping them with physical needs in the home, like fixing up things, but we could fund the self-defense classes. And then our other plan is they have garage space and they are in desperate need of some storage being built. So that is something else. When we can safely go into their garage to help build that, we will, because we want to help them be aware of community members wanting to help them, but also respecting that there's this female-male relationship. So having them see healthy male individuals helping their organization and helping them out, but within reason and with their respect. So that's just something simple our club has done. I apologize, I didn't do a summary of that before, but we have a few more minutes before the 10:30 breakout session if anyone else wants to speak before we do that. Otherwise, we will break out into groups. And then does everyone want me to go over the questions one more time? And I see Erica is talking about them. So who I'm talking about is the girls that are living at this facility. I don't want to classify them as victims because that's not just who they are. They're also learning how to live life again. So that's what I said when I meant them. I apologize about that. Okay, so someone said, yes, please review the questions. So I did want to add, yes.
This is Ed. I did put the questions into the chat room if people want to download from there. Also, I did email everybody on the call the agenda that has the questions as well.
I see that. That's at the very top. So if everyone scrolls to the very top, you'll see Rotary Champions Training Agenda, and you can download that. Otherwise, I can say it right now to everyone before we break out into the session. So question number 1 was, based on the presentation, did anything in particular stick out to you regarding human trafficking? Number 2 is, if your club has completed a project, can you share that in the breakout session? Number 3, what is your club's involvement currently related to ending human trafficking? Number 4, how large is your club's combating human trafficking team? And do you have any non-Rotarian community members on that team? And then the 5th one I wanted to add, because Lynn brought it up, was, what have your clubs done during COVID? I think that is something we should have addressed because it's been affecting the entire world and affecting our communities. Has there been anything in particular that your club has done now that COVID is affecting everything? Ed, do you want to take over?
We ready to break into rooms?
I believe so.
Okay, well, you'll have about 20 minutes in there, so get ready to share. You got your questions, and we'll see everybody back here in about 20 minutes.
Well, if anyone wants to begin talking about what their group talked about, feel free to do that now.
I can start. Our group, we talked a little bit about Stacy's fabulous presentation and how organized and realistic and broad it was. We also about the illustrations, your stories that really helped understand some of the stuff that was going on. Also about the other clubs and some of the things that have been being done there. We talked a little bit about the project that is currently underway in the Brainerd area with Rising Hope, the music venue that will be done, and how they're looking forward to putting that all together. That was basically it.
I'll share our group, a lot of similar themes that Claire shared and that we heard from the groups that shared as prior to going into breakouts. One separate from that I hadn't heard before, one club had worked with the city council and had a proclamation declared, which was put in the newspaper to raise awareness. And then there was a lot of interest in kind of what are some of the next steps, the Bravery Backpacks and the parent groups, reaching out to those as opposed to the schools. So there was, again, that was kind of a repeat of what was said before, but that's how, a little bit from our group.
And in our group, we talked about the different speakers that we've had share information. Elk River, Dave said Bartholomew is with an organization called ACT. I'm not sure what they do, but she's an ex-police officer. Johnny Turnipseed, John Choi is with Ramsey County, and we really talked about having law enforcement member of our club, and then if we can get them to also participate in our task force or our committees. Roseville shared that they really have partnered with a number of organizations in the community to do things around legislative outreach and a rescue and recovery pipeline. They've partnered with a church. A church actually got involved because they can offer shelter. So, and then, what was the other thing here? Oh, we talked about truck stops and how there is an organization called the National Association of Truckers, which you can work with or possibly work with truckers against trafficking. So, just really surprised at how, you know, a trafficker can get passed from truck to truck. So.
I can speak next. Our group talked a little bit about what we have done in different clubs. Farron Barr from Kansas, district governor, with us today, and he had a very good reference that I'm not sure, I mean, how it'll get put out, but the world of exploitation, a video that we can access online. And I mentioned something about a recent development in the Line 3 pipeline that's going across northern Minnesota, really affecting Native American communities. And EMEA had a very good suggestion. They're expected to have 5, 6, maybe more than that, man camps, bringing in over 4,600 out-of-state workers to do this construction. And it's going to have a terrible impact on the sex trade industry. And she suggested that we see about somehow finding out the companies responsible for these camps and so on, and if there is some way to institute some kind of training. So this is something that could be a very large project, could involve a lot of the clubs across the area in some way.
Thank you, Jean. I'll get that information out. A World Without Exploitation, I posted the link on the chat, but I'll send it out in the email notes as well. The other thing I wanted to highlight about Stillwater Sunrise Club is that they were part of helping this nonprofit create this youth homeless study that I believe went on for several years. Is that correct?
I am not certain how long it was. I think it was at least a year.
But if you just Google youth homeless study in Stillwater, Minnesota, you can find it. Claire showed me that study quite a while ago, I believe.
Yeah, and I shared in our group, one of the key takeaways from that study was that homeless youth percentages was in the same in Washington County as it was in the cities. And so it looks different in the suburbs and rural areas, but it's at the same rate. So we have the same problem that our inner cities have too. So I just feel like that was my biggest takeaway as a consumer of that information, to make us act as a community to support our homeless youth.
Is there anyone else that wants to share before we close up? If not, I wanted to thank you all for joining. If I could get everyone from each district to just say goodbye from our task force. I have appreciated all the work that we've done, and I appreciate everyone that's attended. Claire, if you want to speak on our district.
Yeah, this has been great. I think the response has been really good, and hear all the different aspects coming from different clubs and what they're doing, and hopefully that you all got some really good ideas that you can take back into your clubs and start or continue working with what you're doing. There's just a world of material out there. You know, Google and find all kinds of things. So thank you for attending.
Stacy, do you want to speak on behalf of 5580? You are our committee chair.
Okay. So I mimic what Claire is saying too. I appreciate everyone who was able to attend today. And I also love the different ideas that people shared too. So please keep exchanging those ideas. I think we can learn a lot from each other. And human trafficking is continuously evolving and changing. So if we can share information, I think it's just going to make us stronger as we move forward. So again, just thank you. And if you have any questions for me too about the presentation, or would like me to, maybe I will just, Emmy, I think you have the list of everyone who attended. So maybe for the Bravery Backpacks, I could just send you the flyer, because I've gotten a couple of requests, and maybe we could just send it out to the entire list of attendees. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think so. I will send that in the notes from this whole training, as well as a link to the recording. Is there anything else anyone would like me to share on that email when I send it out?
Well, there was a list of so many outstanding resources. I don't know how we could accumulate all of them, but you know, there are. This is such a plethora of knowledge, this group, and you know, just getting people to perhaps send to you the links of the organizations that they brought up. It'd be nice to have that as kind of a glossary or index of the different players that are out there.
I am putting in my email address right now, so feel free if you guys have resources that you want me to share. I've been saving all of the ones in the chat that everyone has been sharing, and also writing down anything that we've been talking about. I will send that in the email as well. I just want to thank you all for attending, especially on a Saturday morning and virtually. It's been really great to hear from everyone, especially from all over the country. So thank you all, and we look forward to working with you in the future.